let's set some context first.
You're Lauren.
I'm Lauren Pearl.
And what do you do?
I am a CFO advisor for startups and other finance folks. I'm basically a CFO nerd for hire. And you are Charlie.
I am. And I guess I'm still a VC.
Are you?
Making new investments.
Okay.
I did get roped into 2 angel investments recently, but I don't know how.
But you were a VC for a very long time.
I was VC for 20 years.
And you've been working with startups for a very long time.
Yes. We also run together and pitch it.
We do.
Although I've been a little bit of a slacker lately.
Same.
And this conversation came out. Some combination of LinkedIn posts.
That's right.
Funding and gender.
And fundraising. And I think one of the things that I found really interesting about our discussion is we're both advisors. We've both been advising startups for a while. And we were discussing really our ways of dealing with that challenge. And our ways are different. I think they're both us trying as hard as we can to do the right thing. But we're in this conversation hoping to have a convo on why we do things the way that we do them, to try and learn from each other and learn from each other's experiences, to continue to do our best and maybe do better. And you have so much experience in this area that's really interesting. You also are coming from the perspective of having been a VC, which is really interesting. And then I have my own experiences working with startups, working with a lot of female founders, and in a position myself that's very male dominated as a female founder and as a female service provider. And you're a guy.
Middle of the fairway.
That's right. And maybe another caveat is neither of us, I think, are an expert in this. We're practitioners as advisors, and we're experts on that, but not experts on navigating bias. And there are a lot of people who are experts on navigating bias. And so likely in this discussion, we are going to be sharing like anecdotal experiences and opinions. If we really want to have a discussion on like, this is absolutely the best way that is like science driven on how to deal with this, that would be a discussion we should probably bring to an expert knowledgeable in this. So we're kind of adding to the discussion with our own anecdotal experiences, but not serving or promoting ourselves to be experts who know all the data behind what we're talking about.
I actually think that's a really good framing. And that's one way calling this navigating bias, I think, is where I play things a little bit differently. Because I imagine, and I've been told, and I don't think you would disagree, bias exists everywhere in every facet of professional.
Absolutely.
Right. And so we need to tell women or other underrepresented groups that the experience of their life is different than how I go about mine. Right?
Sure.
Straight white dude, I go about life in a relatively consequence-free world. Doors just open and, whatever.
Sounds great.
It's pretty good. It's been pretty good for a long time, admittedly. And sometimes, and actually this is sort of where this part of this post came, I think there was another thread, is that I've been nudging and maybe trying to overcorrect a little bit on, I can't do anything about that right now in this situation. Right? Like if you are pitching, if you were trying to raise money, there are shitty things about your experience.
Sure.
That in the purposes of this fundraise, right, for the next couple of months we have. That's a given. It's sort of not going to change.
Yes.
And I have tried to push, and I think it comes off as not empathetic. Hey, I'm not sure. I don't think there's anything you can do about it, right? And I actually think in some ways, walking in with the acknowledgement of that as a core part of your experience, I think actually harms some people in front of me. So I'll give you an example.
Please. Yeah.
I don't know what other people are thinking, but when people come in and pitch me, in my 20 years experience, to be totally generalized, I think anytime I turn down a guy that looks like me, he thinks I'm an idiot.
Sure.
For the most part.
Okay.
Right? It's unlikely he thinks the majority of the pie is him.
Okay.
Anything about either the pitch or who he is or all that sort of stuff. Believe, and I know this anecdotally because I've been told, that anybody who is not in that category, women, people of color, walk out of those meetings and they cannot help but wonder how much of the turn down is because of who they are.
Right.
or because of real things they experienced in the meeting.
Right.
Right. Which I sort of take a yes and approach.
Yep.
Where there are plenty of anecdotes where here's the thing that was said, here's the thing that was done. Here's a very clear bias that I experienced that is different than how I believe somebody else would experience this.
Yep.
And I got turned down. That's not 100% the reason why. Like, I remember one of the founders I backed, she came out of the meeting, which was very frustrated, and she's like, if I was a guy, I think I would have this round raised already.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of pushed back, and I said, well, obviously we can't run that experiment.
Yeah.
Right. Although there have been versions of that
Right.
experiment. Sure.
He's who's pitching. This
Yeah.
Thing. Yeah.
And different people get different questions and all of that sort of stuff, right?
Yeah.
But that, I think, clouded her assessment of pitch. And we didn't have a conversation about the growth numbers that are actually
right. What she could have actually done to improve the pitch.
Like, this is not a small bet. And unless we work on that, this isn't going to get better.
Yeah.
I think there's a certain level of like frustration that happens, especially with the headlines. Here's who gets fudged. I don't think there's any way that doesn't affect your ability to pitch.
Sure.
If the headline is the thing you're thinking.
Yeah.
And so I'm writing a book on this, but not on this topic, but about fundraising for the 99% of people who struggle to raise.
Yep.
Right. And in my book, I'm sort of like, you got to work on all of these other things that are in your control.
Yep.
Because the bias part, you're not going to change in this meeting, and fighting it in the meeting is actually probably not going to get you the money.
Yeah.
Actually.
So I want to kind of speak to some of the things you said, because I agree with a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I think some of the things that I heard that in particular really stuck out were, one, this idea of going into that meeting with this perception of bias, or as someone who's going to face bias, obsessing or thinking about that too much can hurt your ability to pitch, your ability to see other aspects of things you could change or improve about the pitch. I think that's really interesting. And I think the second piece is sort of thinking about that there's nothing you can do, right? That's a piece that's out of your control. So for the first bit, focusing on the bias, I think this actually is super individual. So I have encountered a startup that I recall that was part of an NYU program that was doing very well. They were founded by a team of Black founders. They're all Black men. And the CEO of the company was actually on a panel speaking about bias in fundraising. And he was asked a question by the audience around, how do you go into a meeting? How do you think about this? What do you do to kind of prepare yourself? You know you're going in and going to face this bias. And his way that he dealt with this was that he said, I don't go in thinking that I'm going to be any different than any other founder. I don't think about it. I can't think about it for me. I just go in thinking I am going to get this, and that's what works for me. For that founder, that is the right move. And as an advisor of a founder like that, I think getting curious about how this person wants to handle this situation and picking up on those cues is part of the responsibility. Because some founders really want that. Other founders experience the bias and it feels full, and ignoring it is not going to help the problem. It's actually something that they need to deal with and prepare for to feel better and confident. And I think that speaks to the second point you make about there's nothing to be done about it. I actually disagree with that. I think there is a lot of stuff you can do about it by acknowledging it and thinking about what those biases will be and over-indexing on the parts of the pitch you can do to counteract that bias. So, and I encountered this actually in my own pursuit with startups I've been in. I used to have a startup with a co-founder. We did an offsite facilitation startup where we were doing strategic change at offsite. And I was partnered with a male co-founder who was a PhD from Columbia. And luckily for me, he'd actually studied a lot about bias and gender in his PhD program. And so when we went in to do our pitches for our startup to work, it was really important that both of us were perceived as equals. We were equal co-founders, 50-50, and our expertise had to be perceived as equal because the price we were going to charge was a premium. So it had to be really 1 + 1 = 2 or 5, not like 1 + 1.5. And so he informed how we would pitch to make sure that perception of him being more elevated than me didn't fit. He would say, Lauren, when we walk into the room, I'm a man, I've got a beard, I've got a PhD from Columbia. You might have 15 more experience in advising than I do, but still when we walk into that room, people are going to assume I'm your boss. And so we're going to do things to counteract that. You're always going to speak first in the room. On slides that feature both of us, your picture's going to come first. It's going to be subtle. It's not crazy, but we're going to know that that's a bias people will have, and we're just going to work against it subtly. So it's just not an issue for us. So I think in the same way, as an advisor, it's part of the responsibility to more deeply understand the bias so we can think of clever things like that to make it less likely that that will be the reason that the pitch doesn't work, right? If you're working with a woman founder, for example, and they're working on a construction-based startup, construction is an industry that doesn't have a lot of women in it. And so there might be some natural bias against this founder can make a business like that work. And so I, as an advisor, will be thinking about, okay, that's probably a bias coming into the room. What do we do to counteract that bias? Do we talk about all the engineers in the team? Do we over-index on talking about her engineering background and her ability to do this? Do we think about probably we need a prototype earlier for this founder just to get everybody over that idea that she can't build something, right? Anticipating that arms them when they come in the room, those biases get reversed or negated first so people can actually listen for it.
Yes.
So, and I don't think we have to obsess about that one-on-one with the founder.
Yeah.
But as an advisor, I think it's helpful if you can understand the problem and really dig into it, be aware that it exists. And then part of your job is to think about how do we navigate this? How do we minimize this as just one more aspect of the pitch of things we have to think about.
100%. So I totally agree, and I definitely have done that. And I like what you said, as just one more aspect.
Yes, it's just one more thing.
And so, yes. And I think the category of like obsessive that I am thinking about trying to push that, right, is not working on all of those details. This just isn't working because I am in this group.
Right. That, there's nothing I can do.
No more dApps and all of that sort of stuff, right? Like, when I say there's nothing you can do about that, there's nothing you can do about like who you are. But, for example, and I just had this conversation at Venture Holiday Party the other day at New York Stock Exchange, and this founder was telling me about her company, and I remembered it because she had applied to some of the events that I had done. And now she didn't make it. And the startup basically helps dental practices increase their revenue.
Okay.
And that's not how she pitched it. It was all about like explaining procedures to patients and adherence, and it was all this sort of thing that felt like a nice to have. And when I pushed her, I was like, "So you're alive?" She said, "Yes." I said, "How much money are you making dental practices?" And she goes, "Some of them up to $50,000 a month." I was like,
"Oh, that's the number you should lead with."
I was like, if you can make every dental practice $50,000 more a month.
That's right.
Now, we all know I'm never going to cut it down, right? It's not going to be every dental practice. You're not going to get all of them, whatever. There's no world in which I can argue that's not a big size of business.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
That wasn't the lead thing.
Yeah.
Right. And I was like, oh, if you come in saying we are currently making dental practices more than $50,000, anybody, no matter who's across the table, is taking that.
Right.
You lead. Right. And when I asked her originally, like, how much more are you making? The answer was, well, it depends on the situation, blah, 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 blah. It's like, no.
Yeah.
Because we already baked that in. And what I pointed out to her is like, here's the bias that's in the room. Thank you, society. But because you are female, I'm assuming you're less aggressive. And that is just, it's not because I'm a bad guy.
Society in the US has decided that this is a common trait.
So when you don't say, I'm making these guys a fuck ton of money and there's a lot out there, right? Then you walk right in to reinforce that stereotype, right? And so I said, I guarantee you, I'm 100% right about this. You do not have a slide in your deck that says within 7 or 8 years, you're getting $200 million a year. So my guess is you probably maybe indicate what goal you have with this round of money.
Yeah.
And she did. I said, is it possible that you can make more than that? yeah, of course it's possible. It's like, oh, so you didn't even give the number that was the most possible money that you could make in this round. And so it's like that kind of thing, I think people have to do all the time. And you're 100% right.
Yeah.
That, like, to me, that's working on the bias aspect.
Sure.
Right? And as one of the aspects of like, you don't have much traction yet, that's going to be a strike against you.
Sure.
So let's go in talking about what we will do versus what we have done. Like there are
Yes.
any number of things
Yeah.
where you're like, here's what will be perceived as a strength.
Yep.
Here's what won't be.
Yep.
Some of those are objective, like I do not have much traction yet.
Yep.
Some of them are, we're a team of 2 female co-founders and immediately we have to push into this, like we aggressively go after money kind of thing.
Sure.
That's the thing we're working against.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think separating it out separating it and overgeneralizing it versus working on it specifically. There are 8 things working for us and 8 things working against us, and let's pick them apart. Like
you're saying that's the better way, is like
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Really drill down on it, much in the same way that, for example, it kills me when somebody who is an older founder sends a PowerPoint. It just feels like it's so unfair, right? But like when you are among the normal curve of founders,
sure,
on the older side, right? And you put up PowerPoint, and the fonts don't quite work because it doesn't open up on your computer right. Versus beautiful Canva, whatever the latest thing is, right? The person's assumption is going to be that is one indicator that this person is not using the new stuff, stuck in their ways. The assumptions that sort of people make. You got to know that.
That's right. I think in general, what happens with founders who are facing bias, whether it's because really any kind of bias that makes them not look like the typical founder, what you're up against is a slew of reasons that are excuses to say no. And so I think what's interesting about your example with the female founder who wasn't kind of going for that aggressive pitch is that I completely agree with your advice to this person, right? I think understanding what is the salient point that's going to get VCs excited, even if it's a little overstated, like that's the way you do it. We all do that. We all say the most rosy picture as like the dream pitch, because that is the dream. That's what we're going for, right? That's the 10x opportunity. And we all know not all of us are going to get there. I think for founders who face bias, sometimes we may need to push more to that. And at the same time, I think the tendency to get into the details, to make sure you're saying what is exactly the truth and not be too overblown, also comes from a bias of a concern for our ability to have substance, right? So in the same way, there's this bias of like a woman being too cautious, you've got the Elizabeth Holmes issue, right? Of if I go in there and overblow all my assumptions, I don't get the same perception from a VC as if a male founder goes in and does the same thing. Oh, he's just exaggerating versus Elizabeth Holmes who goes to jail, right? And I think that's a drastic comparison.
And that was actual fraud.
It's actual fraud. It's a drastic comparison, but I still think that as someone who's facing bias, you're walking kind of a thin line because you're in a room where it's not like reasons to say yes as strongly as it is for someone who's the typical founder, right? Is your typical founder, an investor is looking for reasons to say yes. They're looking for promising aspects. And what we've seen in moments of bias, like a lot of the comparable data I've been looking at is around like job opportunities between like men and women. And this happens a lot in job opportunities where the list of criteria will change based on whether they are held by a woman or a man. A woman will come in and it gets even just like the classic example. I'm thinking of a more nuanced example, but the classic example is sort of like for a job opportunity, we look for a woman to have every single aspect of the criteria in order to be hireable. We want her to have actually already performed those things in the past to prove that she's capable. For a man, we judge them based on their ability to do that in the future. We only care about maybe like 80% of the criteria.
Yeah.
Like statistically speaking, we are more strict in having a lot of confidence that a woman can do a role than we do a man.
Yeah.
And I think,
That's
as you
interesting. I've
mentioned,
only heard that flipped the other way.
that women will
tend
only
to
apply. So I believe, and again, we know that we're limited in data here,
Yeah.
we're talking in a cafe, but I believe it also applies to how they will be graded once they have. There's a bias I'm trying to remember, and I'm not going to recall it properly, but studies around that the criteria will change. Like you'll start off with a certain amount of criteria, and then the criteria will change in order to, they will be changed to suit a male candidate, and they will be changed to weed out women candidates. So we should, if we record this, should take this up. But I'll go find the study and show you because it's fascinating, where it's sort of like you reorient your actual standards to the male candidate that you're seeing, versus for a woman, you will orient new standards that are reasons to not select. And it's just, again, it's subconscious. It's just another form of bias, where when you see a candidate that looks, smells, and feels like the kind of candidate you thought you were going to get, you tend to kind of reverse engineer what you thought you were looking to that person. And when you're faced with someone who isn't quite meeting that expectation, you have a weird tendency to kind of change those criteria. In this situation, you can tell a woman to be more aggressive in her pitch, for example.
Yeah.
But you also have to realize that she can't just completely change and only be more aggressive. She's also going to be stating that big number, but then she's going to be held to more scrutiny in proving that number. And it is possible that if someone finds fault in that number, even if it's like, well, she kind of over-exaggerating, she may be scrutinized more than a male candidate who says the exact same numbers. So we do need to, in this example, tell the woman that you're advising about, like, oh my gosh, you got to pitch this thing that you're actually doing for dentists. This is totally crazy. And you are doing it. But I think we need to be cautious. If we know we're dealing with a founder who's going to face bias, we don't want to crazy overstate this number. And we want to make sure that she has every single data point to back this up as well, because she's more likely to be asked about it than a male founder would be.
I 100% disagree.
Okay, talk to me about that.
So, first of all, I kind of feel like you're tipping your hand a little bit.
Okay.
Because, and I just see this all the time, some of the words you use, like over-exaggerated.
Okay.
And, I think you may have said like crazy numbers, and you immediately went to like Elizabeth Holmes and all of that.
Sure.
And I would look at Elizabeth Holmes and I would say,
this person actually committed.
He said this thing worked.
Yeah.
It didn't.
That's right. That's correct. That's
Which
correct.
is very different than saying, it is possible that my coffee chain, if we execute, could be doing $100 million.
Sure.
That's not false.
Sure.
Right? They know the word over exaggerate doesn't, it's only an over exaggeration. Working with their top flight CFO candidate, punched all the numbers, and you said, there's no way in hell this thing makes more than $58 million.
Right.
And I tried every single grounded in reality growth number for every class shop I can ever find. Yeah. 58 of 6 years is the peak. And you go in and you say, you could be doing 100. That's an example. Right. I don't actually think that's what happened.
Yeah.
I don't think that's what is happening on either side, actually. And so I think that what is happening is there might be a 10% chance of it being $100 million.
Mm-hmm.
And a weighted expected average of it being 58. And I think most of the female founders I see are pitching 58 because that is what is most likely, what they're confident that they can deliver. And I believe the pitch exercise is an exercise of what is possible.
Totally. This I agree with. I agree with the number that this person should be pitching. I do not think that should be called down. Yes.
Because the expected value of any early stage startup is zero.
Sure, of course.
Because the majority of them are going to go out of business.
That's right. That's right.
If you pitched what is likely to happen, you'd be like, there's the idea we're going to fail on.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to lose all your money.
Right. If you are
confident in saying that is the majority case.
That's correct.
So if you're not doing that, then what are you doing? You're not pitching what is most likely. You're not most likely to do the 58 either.
That's fair. And I think You're correct. I completely agree with you in terms of pitching the number that's possible that sounds super high and exciting. If we were both advising,
It's just possible.
what I mean by high is high enough to be worth investing in, right? I guess what I'm saying is I think you and I would probably tell the founder to pitch the exact same number. My caveat to that would be I would spend extra time making sure that founder understood confidently exactly how to explain that number because she's more likely to get that question.
Right.
For example, a good friend of mine is a VC and she's a woman, and she would talk about the LP fundraising process, which was a crazy kind of window into, if you want to talk about bias, I mean, that you're definitely getting into it there because the representation of women and people who aren't white men in VC is even crazier, I think, than it is in startups. And
although weirdly, the institutional LP world is actually more diverse than the VC world.
Interesting. Would you say that they're also less biased or more biased or same?
I'm just based on like who the people are, because you're disproportionately more likely to have people who are state and government employees and institution employees, institutions that have inclusivity policies, sort of stuff, right? So the people who run the New York State Common Pension Fund that invests in venture capital come through government hiring. And I'm not saying that's like bias free, but it is very different than a bunch of rich tech bros get together and decide to form a fund.
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
That is really interesting. Actually, it's an interesting context to what I was about to share because it makes it, I'll share the thing and then we can reflect on it. But I was speaking with this friend who, when she was first starting her fund, now she has a thriving fund, it's doing quite well. But at the beginning, she was pitching and she had been part of communities of folks who were starting VC funds to learn how to do it and get it done. A lot of the advice she had gotten from the generalized groups was, you're not going to ask to see your model. Like no one asks to see the Excel model of your VC. They want to hear the pitch. They want to hear who you're going to invest in. They're not going to bother looking at the numbers. And then she went and worked with a group that was about women VC, specifically emerging funds, right? And they were all reflecting on their experience so far pitching LPs. Every single one of them was asked nearly every time to show their model.
Yeah.
The scrutiny is different. So the statistically speaking, it sounds like, again, we're not dealing with data for whatever reason, because bias, if the person that you're sitting across from doesn't subconsciously see you as the typical founder, you're going to be subjected to more scrutiny. And so I do not think you need to call down the number you're going to state. I agree with you. You need to ramp it up to what a VC is going to expect as your representation of the opportunity at hand, right? Which is at a certain level. You can't say what the most likely scenario is because that's zero. To say what the reasonable dream scenario will be, right? The dream scenario will be.
Dream scenario. That's what everybody wants to do. Because I'm sitting here as Neanderthal, lizard-based VC, saying the whole time you're talking, I'm like, can this return my fund? Can this return my fund? Can this return my fund? And it's just either yes or no.
You're looking for the opportunity. You're looking for the opportunity.
If I'm not a strong yes on this has the potential, nothing else you said.
That's right.
One point I want to make about the detail part, and this is where I think it gets really tricky.
Okay.
So first of all, one of my largest investors in my fund, Kathleen Brown, who was at Wellesley and now is at Denison, walked out on my model with me.
She wonked
out on my.
She went through it.
She wanted to see my model.
Yeah.
And my model for my fund was one of my most favorite things to talk about. There are I'm just a data point of one.
Yeah.
But I'm a guy who raised a VC fund, and I showed my model.
Yeah.
A lot. So it's not as if I just got a free pass to not show the model.
Sure.
Just being a guy. I think if you go in and say, you have to back this number up, right? My worry is that the majority of the meeting, too much of the meeting, is going to be in the weeds. And
that will focus their attention on the backing up part.
If you ever watch a really good political candidate, we will always turn the attention of the conversation to wherever the strengths are. Right? I'm so glad you asked about crime, because what it really comes down to is making sure that everybody has the basic necessities they
Right.
need.
Bring
Let
it
me
back,
tell you,
bring it back to the
policy
talking
and,
point.
all
That's
that sort
right.
of stuff,
That's right.
right?
That's right.
And so here's an example of, for example, how I see some female founders. I think just the meeting based on what they got asked, but then wind up down a rabbit hole. So somebody takes a pitch and they say, well, how big did this get? And so, for example, how big, how fast? Because I think you really need to hit this market really fast.
Yeah.
So, like, what do you think you're going to do next year and the year after that? So, on one hand, you would say this founder is more likely to get more scrutiny. So, when she answers the question, you really better be right and have the backup. So, inevitably, what I wind up seeing happening is like, cool, I'll get you that number. Let me just take a look at the number.
Sure.
And it actually, I think, comes off as less on top of your stuff. As a founder who's 40% of the teams that I backed had female founders, I would 100% say that the female founders were more on top of their business, their finances,
Sure.
than
Right.
the guys. And gross generalization. If I say, what kind of revenues are you going to do next year? And you're like, hold on, let me get you that exact number.
Sure.
It's going to be 1.35 versus just being like, it's about 1.5.
Sure.
Right.
Yep.
And while it may be true that people have an interest in scrutinizing more, that's um, their fallback. Answering their questions is not the way to get the yes.
That's a really interesting insight.
And so, like, they may be asking, you have this added challenge of like, I gotta get you away from the details.
Yeah.
Right. And so, and this happened actually, one of my investors worked at BlackRock, debt-based, asset-based.
Oh, completely different kind of lending history. Yeah.
And so he thought the fund was interesting. He's trying to wrap his head around the chances of finding, like, how do you know whether this company, when it's two people on a prototype, can IPO?
Right.
And he's trying to wrap his head around.
He's trying to do like a risk adjusted forecast. And it's like, that's not how this works, man.
The risk adjusted, the risk of underwriting the risk of an individual deal.
That's right. Yeah.
I was like, dude, you're never going to get it.
That's right. That's right.
If you look at this through the lens of the risk of an individual deal,
yeah,
this is going to end.
Yeah.
Right? The way you need to look at this is, I have 30 shots on goal.
Yep.
And I need 3 of them to work out.
Where do I see the biggest opportunity?
Right. And so what you're really counting on from me is, given everything you know about me, given the top of the funnel, given the network, given the fence, whatever.
Yeah.
Can I, over the course of 3 or 4 years, run into 3 exits of at least $250, $300 million?
Right.
That's the way the economics is. And that is what got him there.
Yeah.
And there's a power dynamic, right? I'm asking him for money. Who am I to take him off his questions? He's got a line of questioning.
Sure.
I should answer all his questions.
Right.
And where I push people is,
you got to
don't
be
answer the
direct.
question. You got a shitty question, right?
Yeah.
And that happens all the time. We've seen the HBR study, right? When we get risk-based questions.
Yeah.
And guys get upside questions.
Right.
I think the mistake is, don't answer the risk-based questions.
Interesting.
Because then you're going to spend the whole time
talking about the risk and not the opportunity.
The downside. What are the chances that you're going to get somebody to say yes if the whole meeting was at the downside?
Interesting. So what's really cool is you're talking about additional preparation. You're actually talking about countering bias. It's just in a different way, instead of digging more into the details. Though I would still caveat that you should at least have them buttoned up if somebody asks, because it's a stupid reason to get away.
Anyway, because it's being a good CEO.
But preparing to face more risk-focused questions and reorient the conversation towards the strengths is something that you'd focus a bit more training on, you'd be thinking about, because you know kind of what's going to potentially happen in that room. And again, goes back to, as an advisor, deeply understanding different biases different people might face, which I think sometimes is about identity, but also could just be about, oh, it's a certain kind of startup. This kind of startup tends to fail in this way. So we need to really be thinking about, okay, we're going to counter those thoughts and stereotypes about this type of startup right away by mentioning certain kinds of elements in the pitch so people can focus on the opportunity. In those same ways where you're thinking about, okay, what's really strong about this that we're going to focus on? And what are the weaknesses that we're going to like mention briefly and push this? Like, how are we going to make this a powerful pitch for this unique startup and for this founder, given all of the challenges they face? And that sort of the responsibility as an advisor. And probably when I think about investing time in understanding biases, especially the ones that I don't personally face, that's kind of what I'm thinking about, is trying to get better at anticipating what's going to potentially happen in the room so that I'm giving those correct tools. And you've given me a great tool, which is make sure to steer folks away from diving into the details, even if they have them super duper buttoned up, because you just don't want the conversation to lag there. You want it to go and focus on the opportunity that's at hand.
Yeah. Yeah. So my wife got me this fancy toothbrush for Hanukkah present. We do Hanukkah and Christmas, right? So
same, we do too.
I don't know if I'm getting another present.
Yeah.
One thing I asked for is a fancy toothbrush.
Excellent.
And it tells me where I'm putting too much pressure. And so as a percentage of the whole thing. And I feel like the minutes spent on things that are like lead into the bias or fulfill, the thing that somebody was worried about is like a thing you should work towards lessening the amount of time. So I'm now in this like gamified habit. I brush my teeth with an app and I'm like sitting there and trying to, make sure I don't put too much pressure on. Okay, I got 3 seconds, right? And I think I could transcribe 10,000 meetings and I would, nobody has this data. Somebody should do it. Right? The time spent on upside potential is a direct correlation to actually getting assets.
I could see that being true. I'd be curious about the causal nature, like what direction it goes in. But it's definitely, right? I would agree that's probably correlated.
So here's the thing, you're upstream, right?
Yeah.
If you know that the guys get 7 upside questions for every 3 downside questions.
Yeah.
And the women it's reversed, right? Then the challenge is, the goal.
Yeah.
The goal is to spend 70% of the meeting in an upside conversation.
That's
right. So the fact that you got 7 questions about it, I think those founders need to control the meeting.
Yeah.
And not be, which is, by the way, really hard. Because you go in and you're like, you see the numbers, what the outcomes are, and you feel like there's a power dynamic.
That's right.
There's a power dynamic, right?
Yeah.
Because they have money.
You're asking for money,
right?
That's right.
And somehow you have to change it, right? Somehow you have to spend 30% of your time on the 70% of questions and 70% of the time on the 30% of questions, which is a different challenge that people have. And the line you need is you can't be dismissive, right? And I hate when I ask a question, somebody's like, that's not what you should be asking right now, because we'll move on to
it's like, well, I asked it.
I'm stuck on it.
Right? Help me clear this. Yeah.
And so you need to like figure out all these like jiu-jitsu.
The one where you're using their weight against them.
Judo moves.
I believe you. I don't know.
I did Taekwondo.
Whereas none of these things are related.
Is figuring all these moves, right?
Yeah.
Where one of the best pitches I ever saw is an old school sales guy who, it wasn't even a pitch, it was and he was saying, here's how I'd like to spend my time. I'd like to spend first 7-ish minutes identifying whether we're a fit. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I do. And if you think that's the kind of thing that you're, interested in, right, then we'll continue.
Yeah.
And if that's not where you want to go after I, then let me know.
Yeah.
Does that sound like a good use of time to you? And then everybody in the audience is like, sure. Holy fuck, you just got everybody in the room to opt into the meeting.
A consent-based sales.
Yeah. So already got,
right?
Old school sales 101. People have been doing this for 40, 50 years. And so the controlling of the meeting
Yeah.
I think is incredibly important, particularly for founders who are more likely to face a meeting that
Right.
it's too much on the downside or the questions,
Yeah.
all that sort of stuff. I think
Yeah.
that we should be, giving people those tools to be able to do that. At the same time, you said something I just want to touch on before we wrap up. You said that people are looking for reasons to say no versus yes, depending on who's in the meeting.
That I guess what I meant by that was in the studies we see around bias, or from what I've read, it seems like the data points to when you have a bias, you might be more in the mode of looking for reasons to say no instead of looking for reasons to say yes.
I think that might be the type of questions that come out. The one thing I am really confident about, every single VC and investor who takes a meeting hopes that this is the one.
Right.
They hope that every single company comes in.
Yep.
And
Blows it
them
away. Yeah.
And it's like, oh my God, we literally saw 10 pitches today, all of whom could be fucking decaples.
Right. That's the great day.
That would be amazing, right? That it's actually an emotional disappointment when somebody comes in and you're like, oh, this isn't as good as I thought it would be.
Yep.
When I actually took the meeting. And, the other thing is that when you take the meeting, they already know, for the most part, who they're taking the meeting with, right? You've got pictures.
They've done some
They've
diligence.
done some amount of diligence, right? So they screen you.
Yes.
So you get the meeting. And they're hoping that they're hoping to say yes.
Yeah.
Right. I think how they treat that meeting and if the questions come out might come from their no bucket of questions, which I think they probably do unconsciously.
Oh, completely. I agree with you.
But they don't take the meeting hoping to say no.
Right.
From the beginning. They walked in with, I really hope this person blows the doors off.
Yeah.
And I think it is helpful for people to go in knowing that this person, at least at time zero,
wants to be able to say yes. Yeah.
And wants to be able to say yes. And I don't care who they are, their background, their age, or whatever. It could be a room of, fucking Stadler and Waldorf's basically sitting there, right? And, no matter who you are, like, they're rooting for me.
Yeah.
Because they want to make a lot of money. And they're hoping that I give a really great pitch.
Yeah.
I think you can't lose that feeling despite the questions and, they're bad at questioning. I shouldn't say when people are bad at hiring.
Right.
I think their intention is to try to make money with you. That's
Right.
why they're in this.
Right. That's what they want to do. You got to help them get there.